great to be here. It's great to be here with Michael in particular. We have had, just in a short time in Congress, two terrific trips, one to the Middle East, Iraq, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain. It's a good trip, and then a really important trip when we went to China, where we had not had members of Congress from the House and not been to China since 2019, and there's been a significant deterioration in that relationship between our two countries. So, you know, the importance, I think, of members of Congress getting out in a bipartisan way is something that a lot of people don't understand. Whether we like it or not as a country, we are a global power. We are engaged with the rest of the world, and that engagement matters. And I think it's really important to get members of Congress out there, show the world that we do have some things that we agree on, that we can work together and try to meet the national security interests of the U.S. So those two trips were a great opportunity. Also, they should have told me you're a big fan of hot chocolate. That's the biggest thing I learned about him on the trip. He's got stories, not just from our trip. So, but it's really been an excellent opportunity to get to know him and to work together on those crucial issues. And I think we are at a really important point on national security and foreign policy issues right now. A quick summary: we're in the post-Cold War era, but we don't yet know what that exactly looks like. We are in a multipolar world dealing with Russia and China. Yeah. You know what? I'm just going to talk really loud, if that's okay. Well, actually, it's not okay because they're recording it. We're going to go through a lot of microphones here. And, you know, trying to figure out what role we should play. And I have, you know, just basic quick template. This was a big part of why we went to China. We are going to have to deal with China. You hear a lot of rhetoric around the country about, you know, we have to defeat China, we have to win the competition with them. And that's all well and good, but China's not going anywhere. They are a major economic power. We have got to figure out how to coexist with them. And that's not to say that we don't have things that we're competing with them on, that they're not doing things in the world that are deeply problematic that we don't need to deal with. But I think viewing this as a zero-sum game is a mistake, and it's a mistake on China's part too, and that's a message that Michael and I delivered. You know, China, I have this way of summing it up, that China's got this whole Marxist-Leninist late-stage capitalism crap about how the U.S. is going away. So we're not going away. It's just not happening. Yeah, I mean, you know, they may not be as strong as they were in 1962 or something, but we're not going away. So stop thinking that that's the future. We have to figure out how we can, you know, work together and peacefully coexist. And I think that impacts a lot of our other foreign policy decisions. The world is simply a more competitive, more multipolar place than it was during the Cold War, and certainly than it was in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War. How do we engage in that world in a way that meets U.S. interests, protects our national security certainly, but meets our economic interests as well? I'm very interested in doing that. I'm very interested in making sure that we can do it in a bipartisan way. And one of the great problems as we face the rest of the world has been such a difference between Trump's president, or Trump's not president, Trump's president, Trump's not president, Trump's president, and the rest of the world is suffering a lot of whiplash about what does that mean in terms of where the U.S. is. How can we rely on you past a 4-year cycle? The only way to break that is to get Republicans and Democrats to work together where we can. To help with some of that reinsurance. There's 1,000 other things going on, but I always find these conversations more interesting when it's a dialogue. So I will stop there and give the one functioning microphone that we currently have over to Michael.
Well, thank you so much for the kind invitation. You know, this discussion this evening combines 3 of my favorite things. On a good discussion of foreign policy, 2 being the wonderful Ripon Society, and 3 going on good codels with Adam Smith. So it really has been a great first year in Congress, and certainly our trip to Iraq in the spring, which was my first return to that country since 2008, was a very meaningful trip and important trip to see our counterterrorism operations and multiple challenging issues there in the region and interests. And then this very historic trip to China, as Adam mentioned, first House delegation since 2019, and I think both of us went in it very clear-eyed with areas where we have some significant disagreements with the Chinese, but also an understanding that we do have to have continued dialogue and find accommodations, which doesn't mean giving up American interests or values, but it means articulating them. And so I think both of us agree that we would wish future CODELs to be frequent and large for our colleagues to go and have enjoyed sharing some of our lessons and our experiences with others. And one thing that I really appreciated on the trip that Adam led and that I thought was significant was, during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we had pretty regular military-to-military contacts kind of all up and down the chain, and so that if something were to happen, it didn't spin out of control. And while President Trump and the Chinese chairman do have an ability to talk directly themselves, they're not the general frequent military contacts up and down the chain of command, and that was something that we articulated on our trip. We also made the point that every member of Congress has someone in their community, probably multiple members in their community that they know quite well on a personal level, that has had their family devastated by fentanyl, and that it is a significant challenge and important criteria in improving the U.S.-Chinese relationship is that China take additional efforts to combat what's happened with fentanyl in the U.S. It's something they have their own historical understanding with the opium wars and other issues, and I think they seem to recognize that, and also sort of alluded to the fact that it was maybe some leverage in negotiations as well too. But we simply are impacted. All of us, we represent our voters, and our voters are impacted in a big way by the fentanyl issue. And then the thing I also articulated in our meetings was, it wasn't that long ago that there were issues of global importance where America and China were on the same side, particularly nuclear proliferation with the Iranians in the mid-2000s. And it is unfortunate, and I think to the detriment of the Chinese people and their leadership in the region, that China has decided to be with the bad actors crowd with regards to the war with Russia and Ukraine, Iran, and North Korea, and that what else is ever going on between America and China specifically, that the world will be a better place if China makes some different strategic decisions with regards to some of the problematic actors. And so
it's NDA time, so everybody knows that everything that can't get done during the year gets stuck on the NDA or tries to get stuck on the NDA. So I'd like to get your thoughts as it relates to China AI. There's a lot of efforts right now to try to add AI, gain AI legislation from the Senate. There's all this stuff about outbound investments on China, and there's now let's just preempt states from doing AI regulation. I'm curious what your thoughts on what kinds of things outside of your jurisdiction that you have thoughts on that where it might go. And for Congressman Baumgartner, given all your work overseas, there's a certain strain within the Republican Party. It's let's decouple from China. Let's have tariffs on Canada and Mexico and Europe, and let's not have any more legal immigration because it can't be any good for America. I'm just curious where you see that strain in the Republican Party, and where do you see it going, and is it as bleak as some of us who think that we should be more engaged in the world from that perspective? So thank you.
There's just two things. One, in the NDAA process, it's a great process. Starts, February, March, April, when we have the various Pentagon people come over, testify, put the budget together, do the whole thing. And the committee, we are pretty close now to being done with what we have been working on. We're supposed to file the bill on Thursday. There's always that awful moment in the process when leadership wakes up and says, oh yeah, there's an NDAA. Let's see how we can muck this up. So yeah, they dive in and they offer a whole bunch of different pieces and everything. We're trying to sort through that. And they also don't move as rapidly as I would like them to. So a lot of those issues are still up in the air and still being debated by leadership and the White House. And I'm trying to help guide them to that point. And much of it is, not much of it, some of it is the China piece. You mentioned also the Biosecure Act and a couple other different pieces. Look, I'm a de-risker, not a decoupler. And I am worried about some of the language that's being talked about that is very much drawing that line between us and the U.S. and cutting us off and breaking us off. And one big point, and something that I'm curious, I don't think I've asked you about this, but I'm curious Michael sees this the same way. There's a feeling in America that we need to put our arm around all of our great research and all of our great technology, because that way we can maintain our lead. The rest of the world can't possibly catch up. I think that's stupid, okay, and completely wrong. The notion that China can't figure things out on their own, they kind of got something going on there. We toured a smartphone factory, and I've toured a lot of factories in the U.S. It's pretty damn impressive. They got smart people doing smart things. So I think we have to get off of that idea, and maybe we can figure out how to steal stuff from them now. But certainly engage, and also when we place those limitations on what we can get from China and what we can give to China, it hurts us in the rest of the world. The undecided vote, if you will. The rest of the world is trying to figure out who they should do business with. If they can't do business with us, because if they do business with China, they can't do business with us, we are isolating ourselves further and further, and I think we begin to fall behind and lose that edge. So I'm worried about some of those provisions and where they might go. Now there's a whole bunch of different pieces into what we finally decide. I think it's probably going to slip because they're just not making the decision right now. But that's my general approach on those issues. I don't want to go too far and isolate the U.S. from a business standpoint, from an investment standpoint, from a research standpoint. I think we got to stand up and compete. We got to stop thinking that we can just put our arms around everything and hope that nobody catches up.
Yeah, I think just a couple comments on China, and I'll talk about the issue. Well, I'll combine the two. I think for our voters, what's really important is that we talk about what we do here in Congress, what we support is how is it in the U.S. national interest, and frame it in that respect. I had. One of the nice things I thought about Adam is I was a little skeptical of him because he went to the University of Washington, but then I found out he had the good sense to send his son to Washington State University, where I went. So he, the 6'7" is my fifth grader. But in between Washington State University and Harvard, I spent a year with the Jesuits in Mozambique doing development work, and that's why I went for international development. And so for somebody that does realize that it's a big, messy, dangerous Hobbesian world out there, and that, in my view, it's just naive to think that we can close off and become fortress isolationist America. We have too many interests in the world. The world is too interconnected to that to be in the best U.S. interest. That to get here to Congress and see some big changes in my first months with entities like USAID and other entities is that we have to frame that again, why does this matter to our voters and how is this in the U.S. interest? And I think there are some things that have happened in the previous administration that eroded some trust on America's international engagements, and also not just the previous administration but over the last essentially since 9/11 some things that have happened here where America's taken some actions where they haven't always been articulated to the American people. The fact that our uses of force are 25 years old, and that we have Congress has not had that debate and made the case to the American people. This is why this needs to happen, and why it's in our interest. So I think those are some of the things that we need to do across the aisle, not just with Republicans, because there are some resistance on the Democrats' side as well. But ultimately, for me, what I'm trying to do in this first year is, first, learn where the bathroom is. Secondly, and fight for my district, and then thirdly, establish myself within my own conference on having some credentials and some expertise in some of those areas. And to that extent, it's gone well, with my colleagues. Certainly with the Iran engagements, which I was a large supporter of. I was on the campaign trail. I used to say my favorite thing about Donald Trump was that he sort of ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian terrorist leader, because he was a singular force for bad things in the Middle East, and had almost killed me on a few occasions, killed more Americans than anyone else. And so in that respect, I was a supporter of what happened to Iran. But within our conference, we had a lot of folks, I think, had either campaigned on kind of the black and white, isolationism, those sort of things, and articulating why it was in the U.S. interest. And similarly, I think Maduro is a bad guy in Venezuela. I think the Western Hemisphere would be a lot better off if Maduro was not the Venezuelan leader. I think we as Republicans and the administration need to do a better job of explaining why that's in the U.S. interest that's going right now. So that's just something that we have to work on.
Two questions. One you pretty much just addressed, which was what was your takeaway besides the talking points about how China is on the ground with all of the structural issues and problems. So maybe to Congressman Smith, your takeaways. And then the other was, on kind of decoupling. Is it, what is in strategic competition? What does strategic competition, a win for the United States, look like? What is the end state where we say this is acceptable? Is it the CCP dissolves? Is it they return to the 1990s economy? They can't compete. They're not going to modernize the military. But what does winning the competition look like? Easy question.
The only thing I would add, that second one could get me rambling again. But on the first one of the things that really struck me, even before we went, because I had a couple of dinners with the Chinese ambassador here, which sort of got to this, hey, you guys ought to come. And he was very forthcoming, brought up having dinner with him again next week. And there is a willingness on China's part to engage with us that really didn't exist even 2 years ago. And I tell this story, I went to the Shangri-La dialogues in 2019, and the defense ministers from most of the Asian countries are there, including the US. This was the brief period when Shanahan was our Secretary of Defense, our acting Secretary of Defense, actually. But the Chinese defense minister got up there and gave a speech. It was like something out of, I don't know, some cartoonish movie. This guy, he attacked the US in the most clownish way imaginable. He went after us for absolutely everything. It was, Khrushchev pounding his, shoe. I don't know if he ever actually did that, but anyway, supposedly did. We will bury you, sort of thing. And I was like, Jesus, calm down a little bit there, dude. But that was sort of their outlook. Was, we're coming. You're going down. And I think because of a lot of those issues that Michael alluded to, they got a huge youth unemployment problem, they got a real estate bubble that makes our 2008 real estate bubble look small, they got all kinds of, I think they decided that this whole, US is just going to fade and we're going to dominate. I think they decided, no, we need to start having a conversation. And I think that was a real big opening. But yeah, we shouldn't be naive about the fact that they're not still going to be a problem, which brings us to the second part of your question. What does success look like? Well, to me, success looks like both China and the US have strong, robust economies, that we can continue to, both compete in a way that enables us to meet our economic needs, that it's not a zero-sum game. And I think the second thing is, if China decides to actually start playing by some set of rules, and this was actually one of the more interesting exchange, I forget who it was, I think it might have been the mayor of Shanghai, when they were making the case that this rules-based international order that we've created is unfair because when it was created in the 40s and 50s and 60s, China was nothing compared to what they are now. They've changed. Shouldn't the rules change? And I agreed, actually. I think they're right. I think the world that we created in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, different world now, and we ought to work with countries like China and Brazil and South Africa and India and other countries that are coming up. But there's got to be some rules. At which point we like to get into the dozen or so countries that China currently claims their sovereign territory and is pressing forward on those claims. In the Philippines and Japan, it's not just about Taiwan. If you guys want to have a greater role, understand, with great power comes great responsibility. You think it's been easy being the world's #1 superpower for the last 80 years and have to be responsible for all the crap we've had to be responsible for? Not easy, all right? You can't just come in and take. So if we can get to the point where China's working with us on, protecting the environment, on dealing with the global warming, dealing with the energy crisis, dealing with poverty, dealing with terrorism, dealing with nuclear proliferation, start having those conversations whereby, yeah, some of the times we're going to fight, some of the times we're going to try to work together, it's not going to work out, but at least some of the time, the two most powerful nations in the world are working together to make the globe a better place, and China feels a sense of responsibility on that. And we are a long way from that place right now. That responsibility, they still have this whole 100 years of humiliation thing, and it's like, I've used this, diplomats tell me I'm not supposed to. got to get over it, guys. All right, you know, we've all had tough runs in life. You can't obsess over it. You're off the ground now. You're a big, powerful country. Let's stop with this 100 years of humiliation. You got to be pissed off all the time. Let's work on dealing with some of these problems. And we have a long way to go to get to that happy outcome. But that's what I think success looks like.
You know, I think, you know, if you're, probably many of you that look at the U.S.-China relationship may have read, you know, Graham Allison's book, you know, Destined for War, which, and Graham was one of my professors at Harvard, and of course, you know, he looks at big strategic, drastic terms, which is that, you know, throughout history and his paradigm, looking at the war between Athens and Sparta, that there was the established power, and most of the time, the established power and the rising power, and they're going to clash because they're the two biggest kids, you know, on the block. And so, how do you avoid that? So, you know, I think in the big picture, avoiding war with China while still maintaining, you know, U.S. interests, you know, but in the new term, some things that Ab spoke of, I think, can we have a productive relationship on non-proliferation? You know, I think which should be in the Chinese interests as well too. I mean, I think if you're Japan and you're looking at a decision right now whether what your security profile is, you know, you may be looking at things somewhat differently than you did in the past, given the threats in your neighborhood. But you know, in the short term, you know, I don't think Russia would be able to continue their war with Ukraine without Chinese continued support. So why does China see that in their interest? Is it a precursor to Taiwan, or what actually do they see there? So non-proliferation, more responsible behavior towards Ukraine, and then would be two things I'd look at in the short term, small posts. And then we spoke to the fentanyl issue.
I really like what you were saying, or it was interesting what you were saying with education, how many Chinese students are coming over here. My guess would be a large amount are going back to China with their education. We're currently in an environment in the United States, unfortunately, where college education is being vilified, high-tech job education is being vilified, whether it be, you know, engineering, workforce development, things like that. In a diagnostic company where we're even our lowest level jobs, you need a manufacturing background on technology. How are we in the United States going to compete with them in terms of education when it comes to, you know, making sure it is a priority for our kids, and it whether it be a college education, an associate's degree, career training in, you know, technology, so we can compete with them, so we can continue to innovate and make things here when we're cutting, you know, research dollars, when we're cutting education funding, when we're you know, we're vilifying college. It just doesn't seem like that's a really good path forward to make sure we're a leader in this. And what is Congress going to do to ensure that we continue to, you know, make sure our young people are ready for this new world?
I mean, we may have different answers on this one. You know, I'm a big fan of higher education, but I think higher education needs to get back to fundamentals, and that it's gone astray. In part, I think Congress federal government made a mistake by making so much federal loan debt available, which essentially created an inflationary situation on college campuses and a distraction from you know, things that the market wants and employment opportunities that they want. But yeah, we have to look. I still want an America that attracts the best global talent, you know, and I think, you know, you're hearing multiple things from the administration, you know, on that. You know, some of it's restricting on one side, and some of it's expanding, you know, on others. You're hearing things. So I think that we're focused on trying to get higher education. I mean, higher education is really a gem of what makes America America, for social mobility, the research and development, you know. So we need to focus on making sure that that's one of our efforts, to try to make sure that happens again as well too. So I don't know if the demonization matters, but it does say something about. And one of the entrepreneurs we met had actually, a very successful entrepreneur, had actually been here with Microsoft for 17 years and then had gone back to China. So I think there's going to be some of this, you know, cross-border relocation activities as well too. But you know, we still have to. I think the higher education piece is just still more interesting to me, that there's so few Westerners want to study in China. I think it says more about China than it does about us, and eliminates you know, some of their issues.
No, I think Michael's absolutely right. I mean, the fundamental problem with our higher education system, people are dumping on, they're not dumping on college per se, they're dumping on our current way of doing it, and rightfully so, because the economics just don't work, right? They just don't. I mean, I'd love to throw the statistic out. So I actually went to 1 year at Western Washington University, 3 years at Fordham, where I got my degree in New York, and then 3 years in law school at the University of Washington. So 7 years all told. I did that from 1983 to 1990. Tuition cost me $31,500 for those 7 years. If you did the exact same thing, assuming that the prices didn't go up, it would be close to $500,000 a year. Okay? So the economics have gotten blown out. And I think part of the economics have gotten blown out for exactly the reason that Michael said. Because we made it too easy. We made that you could get debt, you could go get it. It never worked out. It was a bad deal. We didn't pivot and understand how the world had changed. Because there was a time, back to that's my big theme. You'll hear me say this if you ask me a number of questions. We used to dominate, got to compete. It used to be, in fact, I always like to cite the example. Anybody here from Boeing? Okay, good. Anyway, growing up, we had this, we used to call it the lazy bee, which people now would look at me like, what the hell are you talking about, lazy bee? You gotta work your ass off. No, you go out, get a college degree in anything you wanted to do. Boeing would hire you. You could hang out for a year, they'd train you. Eventually, you'd figure something out, and it'd be fine. And IBM and GM, all these major U.S. companies were able to do that. College education was free, job market was plentiful, and didn't matter what you got your degree in. And also, economically it worked out. Long after that stopped working out, we kept pushing people into college, to get useless degrees at unbelievably expensive prices. And that paradigm has to change. And I'll even also say something that, I like to make Michael think that I'm not completely crazy. So I say this every once in a while. The whole left-wing nonsense at our colleges and universities over the course of the last 25 years has really undermined the quality of our college education.
Straight into my veins.
Yes. It was not an off though over there. I had to give it a little shot. But no, it has in fact happened. I mean, we don't really need a lot of people to be trained to be activists. You'd be trained to actually know how to do something. But if you're going to borrow how many ever hundred thousands of dollars and it's free money and you can go hang out for a while and talk about a bunch of crap, then why not? So we've got to change that paradigm, and central to changing that paradigm, and this is what people mean, I don't think they're so much going after college, is career and technical education. All right? So you got that $500,000 path, or maybe you spend $20,000 and learn how to code. This is now a dated speech of mine, but you learn how to be a cable installer. You learn how to work on, HVAC systems. All these jobs out there that pay really, really well are necessary to what we're doing. You get that technical education. We have got to get a more affordable way to educate the American population if we're going to be able to compete. And I still think we're better off, and I know a lot more of the Chinese people are going back. We're better off bringing them here. We're better off bringing people from the rest of the world to come here because they develop an affinity for the United States. We build a bond. We have greater global power in doing that.
One of the things that the Chinese talk about with their society is, how does the majority of them having only one child, what does that do for both their mentality and then whether they're soft or not? At least when you're looking at the military, their military capability. And I had asked our ambassador. And by the way, I thought we have an excellent ambassador there.
So I've been meaning to say that for a while. David Perdue, outstanding.
Yeah, and really,
Yes.
and part of the things that what I brought home was we need members to go over there to support him. I mean, he wanted us there and helped him with his engagements. And you spoke about some of our colleagues. I have been a little surprised that I've met some folks that are real interested in China that just have dismissed the idea of, well, we can't go there, as if just going there is somehow legitimized or enabling it. And you can go. It's not weak to go to China to talk to someone. So that would be a difference of opinion from some folks that I don't think isn't. But anyway, yeah. That just again, I was really impressed with Purdue, and we had a really wonderful dinner one night where we had a number of ambassadors from other major countries come together and have some informal conversation. And one of the phrases I liked is, around China you hear always the time of win-win that the Chinese say, and of course the joke is that to win-win to the Chinese it means China wins twice. And there is is some of that is like Adam was saying with the territorial disputes. You know, we would be having good conversations about, hey, we got to get along, this sort of thing, and they'd say, well, you know, how about open sea navigation, you know, there by some of these Filipino islands and these things, and then you get a response say, but you don't understand, in the 1500s, so-and-so went there and set foot, and this is what the map shows, so this is rightfully our territory. And then that'd be like the end of the conversation. You're like, well, no, it's a little more complicated than that. You know, they'd ask the differences of opinion. So, you know, so some of the win-win aspects
Well, it's
are.
funny, we were in the middle of one of those conversations, and they were playing out this elaborate argument for why they had a rightful claim. This, I think it might have been the Philippines or whatever, and they're going through this whole thing, walking through, and I just said, so what? And they looked at me like, I mean, literally, so what? I mean, let's say you're right. Who gives a damn? Okay, you're a global power. Here's just a long list of the problems you have and we have and the world has. And you're going to jeopardize all that because of your wounded pride over the fact that you think some diplomat 150 years ago promised you something that didn't actually happen? If you're going to be a global power, you're going to have to grow up a little bit past that point. And that's really sort of where we need to get them to see their role in the world as, you know, having some responsibility, and it accrues to their benefit. I mean, a more stable world is going to help China. I mean, not as directly as simply grabbing a bunch of territory, but in the long run, to a far greater degree.
I kind of know you kind of wanted to take the bait and talk a little bit about power projection and think where China was going with its aircraft carriers and submarines, and then you kind of touched on the diplomatic activities. And then the way you just talked about global power, I'm kind of curious, are they, in terms of the way you view them, are they pursuing those three legs in order to beat us or just to stay even?
It's
And
TBD. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, on an upfront basis, I mean, their justification is the same as our justification, which is we got a dicey little relationship here. We got a competition. They're a pretty powerful country. We got to be at least as powerful, preferably more. At the end of the day, that's it for right now. Okay, you know, we have to be able to deter them. You know, we don't want a fair fight. You know, all this different stuff the military says. That's the mentality. The mentality that I'm trying to get us to grasp is they're not going to be big enough to defeat us. We're not going to be big enough to defeat them. We've got to find a third door here. And on the defense side, is something I'm really worried about. Is we are still obsessed with this whole 1990 neoconservative nonsense of the new American century, and there must be no peer competitor. You know, I hate to give you the bad news. We don't have enough money, we don't have enough resources to be so dominant that China could never possibly be close to us. And if we're chasing that, we're going right down a very, very deep hole. We have to figure out how to deter them. Yes, we gotta have some, military's gotta be part of it. But if that's the only tool in our toolbox, we're dead. It's gotta be diplomacy, it's gotta be partners and allies, it's gotta be, you know, figuring out some way to get along with them. So that's, I have a very strong opinion on that. But not mainly because most people disagree with me. So I'm trying to work through it.
I think one of the things I try to remind myself when looking at China, and I sort of like, you know, most of my overseas career has been in the Middle East, so I wouldn't consider myself a China expert. And one of the great things about these CODELs is it, you know, gives you an opportunity, forces you to take a moment to rise above the daily business of being a congressman and think and study and reach out and talk to people and do these things, and some of the follow-up just makes you more aware. But, you know, there's China, and then there's the Chinese Communist Party, you know, and then there's younger generations of Chinese, you know, and then there's the Han culture within China. And I think I try to just think separately, okay, what are the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party trying to do to maintain their governance structure within that society, and how may that differ than others? And I haven't, to your question, you know, and I haven't coalesced in my own mind around some kind of Henry Kissinger or Brzezinski-esque sort of grand, eloquent strategy to marry those two things. And I don't even know if, you know, one is appropriate in terms of what the, you know, ultimate goal is. What we do know is that we have some specific real interests with them that we need to protect in the here and now, and then we need to do things like disincentivize them from some behavior that we don't want to do in various ways. But you know, there's just something about human nature. You know, it kind of goes back to what I think about the higher ed thing, to get all metaphysical. But you know, it used to be on higher ed, that you just went to your local school, got a degree, it was a low-cost model, and now when kids graduate from high school, I think so much their parents, it's like they're on social media all the time, and you get these kids that think, I gotta go here or go there, or these sorts of things. It's like keeping up with the Kardashians. It's like, it's just a bachelor's degree, go get a community college degree. And I would, if I could control anything up here for hire, it would be a bipartisan effort to make that the right price for undergrad education should be an education that gets you out with zero debt. It ought to be that a part-time job in summer work could get you through school, all told. And that's what we should budget for, is that nobody has to go into debt. That means that you're, not, flying here and flying there for these sorts of things. I have a staff member, so I'm going a little bit rank here, but I have this wonderful staff member that is in so much debt from undergraduate education because she went across the river out of state, for a bachelor's degree in social science. And I thought, where did the system let her down in that sense? There wasn't a guidance counselor or a parent, because an 18-year-old doesn't know the difference between $600 in debt and $60,000
So,
in
besides
debt.
my wife's show, I got to tell us, so both of our kids, we said, when University of Washington State, they graduated debt-free. And I remember our daughter, who was a really good student, her son wasn't quite so good. So she really good, she could have gone to a bunch of different places, and she was looking at different schools, and she had like 10 schools she applied to, did this whole thing. And I remember about 6 months from the decision point, my wife and I were having a drink, and we said, so, she's going to the University of Washington. How do we make sure that that's her decision? We did, and she is eternally grateful for that. But the thing is, and I understand why today's generation is, what I was able to do from a poor blue-collar background was really cool. I mean, I went to Fordham University for 3 years in New York. As you said, I worked at UPS. It wasn't easy, but I was in New York. It was really, and it's kind of sad that someone in my same situation now, that's not on the table. But welcome to life, okay? Every generation's got different positives, different negatives, and everything. Let's get out of this notion that somehow being American means you've got a God-given right to go to whatever college you can get into, and just, we've got to change that entire mindset if we're going to be able to get more value out of the education dollars that we're spending.
And just one thing I was finished on this higher ed thing, just because you have my brain now, I got to get it out, was a couple years ago, when I was still in the state senate, our state legislature is a part-time state senate, and so you can have outside income. So I spent the fall teaching at a counterinsurgency course at Sciences Po University in Paris. Well, Sciences Po is kind of the Harvard of France. And what's interesting about being there is there's not one new high school in Spokane, that isn't at least 5 times nicer in physical infrastructure than the nicest university in France. I mean, we just do stuff so expensive in America. And when the students showed up to go to Sciences Po, there's no student housing dean, diversity dean, no dean of, I hurt my feelings or stubbed my toe. The students, they just find their own place to go to school, and there's not an ice rink in the student gym, and climbing walls and all this kind of stuff. And so, and I know I sound like the old guy walking up the hill both ways, in the snow at the moment, but we just make things so expensive here for non-core reasonable things, whether it's the price of our building or other issues, and that manifests itself. And it's just my bugaboo on higher education for this is that these students, because once you get that deeply in debt for undergraduate education, it's just a millstone around your neck for the rest of your life.
I'm not going to any school that doesn't have a good vegan menu.
There we go. Right.